Hello, everyone. I've got one of the most insane stories I've ever heard to share with you today. This video will be longer than usual, so grab a snack and get comfortable. However, before I begin, I would like to warn you that this story contains graphic content and some viewers or listeners may find it disturbing. I'm going to clean the language up a bit in hopes that's enough for YouTube to allow its monetization. There's only so much I can truly clean up with a story like this one, though. With that being said, let's get right into it. It was extremely hot on the afternoon of May 31st, 1986. Luckily, a blast of summer heat was what many people welcomed on the weekend, not Hadden Clark. Hadden, 35, stood outside of his brother Jeffrey's empty home, sweating in the 92-degree heat. Skinny and lanky, standing at 6 feet 2 inches tall, he leaned against his Datsun pickup truck, feeling more and more sorry for himself as the temperature soared. The house was eerily quiet. Everyone who lived there was gone for the day. Jeffrey Clark, the only brother he had who wasn't in prison, had asked him to pack his bags, leave, and find a new place to live. Hadden had overstayed his welcome. Jeffrey's house wasn't very big and he had a family to take care of. He let Hadden move in with him under the arrangements that it would only be for a short period until Hadden got his life back together and was back on his feet again. By May of 1986, Hadden was working as a cook at a local country club, so his brother wasn't just kicking him out penniless with nothing to fall back on. However, things weren't perfect for Hadden, and he was certainly down on his luck. A few months before being evicted, he had been arrested for shoplifting women's underwear at a local department store. He didn't steal a bra and panties to give to a girlfriend, though. He stole them to wear himself. Less than a year before that, he was medically discharged from the Navy, and doctors had diagnosed him as a paranoid schizophrenic. He wasn't taking the medicine they prescribed for him because he didn't care. On top of all that, his niece he was living with at the time called him a regard, and that really upset him. So all in all, he wanted to leave anyway. While standing out front of his brother's house in Silver Spring, Maryland, packing his personal belongings into his truck in the blistering heat, a little girl walked up to him. What was her name? He thought to himself. He had seen her around the neighborhood several times. Then it clicked. Michelle Dorr. That was it. The tyke with the bangs and the freckles on her nose was his niece Eliza's friend. She was the daughter of a divorced man down the street who had custody of her on weekends. Michelle was wearing a pink ruffled swimsuit that was still wet from playing in a plastic kiddie pool in her backyard. She asked him if Eliza was home, and he said no, but she was more than welcome to wait for her to get back, assuming the family wouldn't be much longer. After this interaction, Hadden went to work at the country club. That was the last time he saw Michelle. Michelle's father, Carl Dorr, had 2 college degrees, one in economics and the other in psychology. Unfortunately, those degrees hadn't done much for him, and by the mid-1980s, he had settled into a series of jobs where he spray-painted cars on commission. His personal life was even worse. He had married Michelle's mother, Dorothy, in 1978, but after their daughter was born, the marriage not only fell apart, but evolved into a brutal custody battle. There were times when Carl would allegedly physically abuse his wife in front of Michelle, which obviously took an emotional toll on Michelle. The stress made that poor child stutter and grind her teeth at night. Once, on Valentine's Day of 1976, Carl showed up at his estranged wife's house and refused to leave. He told her if there was a divorce hearing, he would lie under oath, say she was an adulteress, an unfit mother, and if he lost and he couldn't have Michelle, he'd make sure she wouldn't either. Then, according to Dorothy, he threw her against the wall and hit her, leaving cuts and bruises. Though both were setting up their daughter for an adulthood that would require weekly visits to a psychiatrist, each claimed to love the little girl. Carl said he looked forward to the weekends with his daughter, and that was the case on the last 2 days of May 1986 when he picked Michelle up from her mother. They had dinner at McDonald's. He bought her a toy at 7-Eleven, rented her a kids' movie from a local video rental store, and on that hot Saturday, he filled the plastic swimming pool around noon. That was the only pool he had, but he promised to take her to the neighborhood pool around 4 that afternoon. He watched her splash around in the little pool for a few minutes, then went into the house to watch the Indianapolis 500 auto race he had been waiting to see. Carl's rented house was 2 doors down from Jeffrey Clark's home. While he watched Rick Mears and Bobby Rahal average 171 miles per hour, a new record, he claimed he forgot to check on Michelle outside in the pool. She soon grew bored playing alone and, unbeknownst to him, wandered down the street looking for Eliza Clark. That's when she briefly talked to Hadden right before he left for work. After some time had passed, Carl said he looked in the backyard, but he didn't see Michelle. The pool was still and empty, but he wasn't worried. The neighborhood in Silver Spring, Maryland, where he lived, was known to be a safe suburban area 3 miles from the Washington, D.C. border. Nothing exciting ever really happened there, and he did not doubt that his daughter was down the street playing with her little friend, Eliza. With that in mind, he went about the afternoon as usual, paying a few bills while he finished watching the auto race. However, Michelle never returned home. Starting to get very worried, Carl said he walked to Jeffrey Clark's house looking for her. The Clark family was in their backyard at this time having a small family cookout. When he asked Jeffrey where Michelle was, Jeffrey looked confused and said he hadn't seen her, nor was she with them. To confirm, Jeffrey asked his daughter Eliza if she had seen Michelle that day, and she said she hadn't. Panicked, Carl went straight to the police station to report Michelle missing. Unfortunately for Carl, every rookie cop is told that when a child disappears, they should first look into the parents or caregiver. They are told that because statistically, there's a 90% chance that either the parents or the caregiver knows what happened to the child. It's page 1 in the handbook, said Detective Mike Garvey, the first cop to speak with Carl Dorr. The more they looked at Carl Dorr, the more guilty he seemed to be. After all, he had a history of violence regarding his wife, going as far as to say he would abduct their daughter just 3 months before she went missing. He and Dorothy had been battling over the kid for years, plus he was presumably the last person to see her, so they honed in on him, asking him to take a polygraph the very next day, and he agreed. However, the polygraph examiner, a local fire marshal, told detectives that Carl failed the test and most likely knew more about his daughter's disappearance than he was letting on. Not only that, his estranged wife told the police she believed he was responsible. She also provided them with a motive, telling them he was trying to get out of paying her $400 for child support monthly. When he told the police that he loved his daughter, they didn't believe him. He took a second lie detector test and passed, further confusing investigators. In an attempt to prove his innocence, he underwent hypnosis and took sodium pentothal, the so-called truth serum. None of this convinced the police. Carl snapped after that, and in a psychotic episode told a psychiatrist that he had abducted and killed his daughter. In his altered mental state, he began to believe that people on television shows were talking about him. He would look behind his television set, but would obviously find nothing. He said he truly thought the police were altering his reception to mess with his head. About a day after hypnosis, Carl got into his car and drove to his father's grave. He began talking to his father's headstone, and he thought the headstone was speaking back to him. His mind was so gone that he began to believe he was God's only son. He told investigators, quote, "I believe that if I could find Michelle, I could also bring her back to life. And if I'm able to do that, I must be Jesus," end quote. To make things worse, he began calling himself the White Messiah. The cops took all this to be a form of confession. They had Michelle's father in for questioning repeatedly. It wasn't long before Carl Dorr was committed to a psychiatric hospital for 72 hours of observation. As soon as he got out, he was hauled in for questioning once again. Although it may sound like it, the police did not have tunnel vision regarding Michelle's father. He was absolutely their main suspect, but certainly not the only one. In the days immediately after Michelle was reported missing, the police organized searches and went door to door talking to people in the neighborhood. They didn't get very far, though. Other than Carl and Hadden, no one saw Michelle that day. One of the neighbors told them about Hadden being the neighborhood creep, so they obviously wanted to talk to him after hearing that, and they did. They actually caught up with him the day after Michelle was reported missing in the driveway of his brother's home. He was there working on his truck and collecting the last of his belongings. He admitted to seeing Michelle the day prior. With that information, investigators wanted to know more, realizing Hadden was the last person to see Michelle. Not her father, like they originally thought. Hadden told them he was packing his things in his truck, getting ready to move out, but was cut short because he had to get to work and he didn't want to be late. Right before he pulled off, he spoke to Michelle. He then presented them a time card from when he clocked in at work that day, which was at 2:46 p.m. His boss corroborated, and Hadden was subsequently cleared as a suspect after presenting his ironclad alibi. The police figured if Carl Dorr said he last saw his daughter at 2:10 p.m., Hadden Clark couldn't have abducted or killed someone, cleaned the crime scene, and hidden the victim or their body within 36 minutes. It was nearly impossible. Unfortunately, in the weeks and months following her disappearance, detectives ran out of leads, and Michelle's case would turn cold. Nonetheless, Hadden's story would continue. Hadden, born in April of 1951, was the second child. His eldest brother, Bradfield, had been born a year earlier. Jeffrey Clark, the youngest brother, arrived in 1955. The last child, Allison, was born in 1959. She would run away from home as a teen and later break ties with her parents, telling an investigator, quote, "I never had a family," end quote. The Clark family bounced around Connecticut and New Jersey as Hadden was growing up, rarely staying in any place for more than a year. Hadden's father had both an MBA and a PhD in chemistry, but never seemed satisfied with his employers and was always searching for better pay. Bradfield was a handful from the start and got involved with drugs as a teenager. Surprisingly, he still received 2 university degrees and was highly regarded in the new world of computers and technology. Despite this, in 1984, during a night of drinking and partying, he would murder his date, a beautiful 29-year-old woman named Patricia Mack. After slamming her head against a brick cinder block and strangling her, he dismembered her body into 11 pieces in his bathtub, cooked part of her breast on his grill, allegedly ate them, and stuffed the remaining body parts into plastic bags. He intended to bury the body, but grew remorseful, attempted suicide, then called the police on himself. He received 15 years to life and is still serving time at Pleasant Valley State Prison in California. Jeffrey, the youngest brother, would have his own problems. After earning a degree in microbiology at Ohio State University, he married his childhood sweetheart, and the two made their way to the Maryland suburbs of Washington, where a position at the Food and Drug Administration awaited him. They settled into a quiet house on Sudbury Road in Silver Spring, where Hadden lived with him for a time. He had 3 children before the marriage turned ugly and divorce papers were filed. Marcia accused Jeffrey of physically abusing her twice, and he was convicted on one of the charges, earning a suspended sentence. Hadden had a myriad of developmental issues. However, he did not test as mentally deficient. In fact, he could appear to be a genius when it came to chess, a game that requires thinking and concentration. On the other hand, emotionally, he was a child who lashed out physically when he was publicly criticized. The only place he felt a degree of normalcy was at his grandparents' retirement estate. After his grandfather's term as mayor of White Plains, he purchased his dream house at the edge of Wellfleet on Cape Cod. Nobody called him a regard there, and it became as close to heaven on earth as Hadden would ever find. Flavia Clark, Hadden's mother, wanted her son to have a trade, so she enrolled him at the prestigious Culinary Institute of America, a 2-year chef school in Hyde Park, New York. There, he surprised everyone by demonstrating a real talent for carving ice sculptures and figures from tallow. His chef's education was not without incidents, though. Hadden retaliated against slights by urinating into vats of mashed potatoes. Still, he passed enough courses to graduate from the Cooking Academy in January of 1974. In a rare display of solidarity, Hadden's entire family attended his graduation ceremony. At first, the degree from a top-tier culinary trade school enabled Hadden to pick and choose his employers. However, he was never able to keep a job for more than a few months. His deranged behavior, like openly chugging chicken blood in a restaurant's kitchen, did not endear him to his coworkers or employers. His first few jobs were in Provincetown on Cape Cod. After becoming shunned by restaurant owners in the beach towns of Massachusetts, Hadden did a 1-year stint on the cruise ship SS Norway. After that, there were jobs in Long Island banquet halls and a 3-week assignment at the 1980 Olympics in Lake Placid, New York. In all, Hadden Clark would hold 14 different jobs between 1974 and 1982. During that time, his family disintegrated further. His grandfather died, and his grandmother, in poor health, entered a nursing home. His parents divorced, with his father dying soon after losing the battle with cancer. Hadden then entered the U.S. Navy as a below-decks cook. It was his last chance at a career. However, his shipmates didn't understand a sailor who often wore panties under his uniform, so there were allegedly beatings. One time, he claimed to have been locked in a meat freezer for 3 hours. The Navy attempted to move him to new ships, but there were incidents on those as well. After a final beating where he suffered a concussion from his head being slammed against an aircraft carrier's deck, Hadden was given a medical discharge and was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic. He soon showed up on his brother Jeffrey's doorstep, which coincidentally resulted in him crossing paths with Michelle. Clark's mental state deteriorated over the next 5 years, although his appearance and his behavior weren't bad enough to get him committed to an institution. He eschewed rented rooms and began living under the cab of his pickup truck, often setting up makeshift camps in woods just off an interstate highway. His days as a chef were over. Nobody would hire him by then. He worked odd jobs at minimum wage, was banned from certain homeless groups, and toiled at fast food shops at night. Surprisingly, he had plenty of money. Living alone in the woods cost nothing, so by 1990, he had saved nearly $40,000. In 1988, Clark was stopped for speeding in Rhode Island. Underneath the driver's seat was a .38 caliber Astra handgun. The same police department that had focused on Carl Dorr and Michelle Dorr let him go after he pleaded guilty to destruction of property that had occurred earlier in the year. He was able to walk away with another suspended sentence coupled with probation, a slap on the wrist that now extended him to 2 states. The destruction of property charge was particularly egregious and showed his temper was far from under control. In his last rental before going to live inside his truck in the woods, Hadden was evicted from a house in Bethesda, Maryland because, as his landlord said, quote, he seemed crazy and evil, end quote. Before he left, he literally booby-trapped the house. He began by balancing a 10-gallon can of oil on top of a door so that it would spill onto someone when the door was pushed open. After spraying black dye on the living room carpet, he hid rotting fish heads inside the family's piano, chimney, and stove. As a final act of revenge, he killed both the family cats, placing one dead feline on the front door welcome mat and the other inside the refrigerator. Finally, he stole several inconsequential items from books to tools, and even the family's vacuum cleaner. The smell of decaying fish permeated the house and was extremely difficult to eradicate, the charging document read, yet the combination of a gun possession charge and vandalism set off no alarm bells about the man the local cops had once, albeit briefly, suspected of killing a 6-year-old girl. There were times when Hadden attempted to get help. He would often show up at a local veterans hospital, but after staying a few days and getting a few doses of Haldol, an antipsychotic drug, he would run from the ward and return to the woods. One doctor's diagnosis was a warning, emphasizing his mental state is psychosis with questionable etiology. He states that birds and squirrels talk to him and keep him company. He is tearful at times with intermittent outbursts of anger and agitation, and he is a potential danger to himself through poor judgment and self-sabotaging behavior. Hadden's own words, as recorded by the hospital's doctors, were chilling. I think I have a split personality, he said. I don't like to hurt people, but I sometimes do things I am not aware of. In February of 1989, local police arrested Clark yet again. This time, it was a 17-count criminal indictment. 15 of the counts were for theft. The acts were unusual. Clark had dressed in women's clothing and visited numerous churches in the area. While women inside the churches attended choir practice, he visited the cloakroom and stole both their purses and their coats. When Hadden was arrested on that occasion, he had pulled over to the shoulder of a park road, fooling around with something in his car. When the police offered assistance, he panicked and began fumbling around in the front seat, attempting to hide some of the women's coats and purses. No, he told the cops. You can't go in my truck. It was too late. The police had seen a black gun holster hanging at the top of a seatbelt restraint, and they wanted to see what else he had. When they saw the women's purses and coats, they asked if he owned them. Clark said he did. They're yours? The incredulous cop asked. Yes, Clark answered. I'm a woman, he added. The cops searched further. There were women's wigs, a hypodermic syringe, women's dresses, and a thick roll of cash. Arrested, he finally served some jail time. He stayed inside for 45 days before posting bail, later boasting that he did the jail time on purpose, proclaiming it was much more comfortable in the county detention center than outside in the freezing February cold. Admittedly, he began to like the 3 meals a day, a roof over his head, and movies every Thursday. He was almost reluctant to leave when spring arrived. Although some charges were dropped in exchange for a guilty plea on 2 counts, the sentencing guidelines still called for 3 months, up to 2 years. Again, he was given probation on top of already being on probation in Maryland and Rhode Island. The defendant has serious mental problems and is now addressing them, Rockville, Maryland Judge Irma S. Raker wrote in her sentencing opinion. His public defender, Donald Salzman, was so sympathetic, he wrote a letter for Hadden and instructed him to hand it to any police officer the next time he was arrested. The note read, to any police office. I want the help of my lawyer, Donald P. Salzman, and I want him to be present before I answer any questions about my case or any other matters. I do not wish to speak to anyone concerning any criminal charges pending against me or anyone else or any criminal investigation, regardless of whether I am charged. I do not want to be in any lineup, provide handwriting samples, nor am I willing to give any blood, hair, urine, or any other samples unless my lawyer is present. Listed below are my lawyer's phone number and mailing address. Below the lawyer's contact information was a place for a police officer to sign, and next to that, there was the phrase, quote, to prove that I have read this statement to you or that you have read it, please sign here, end quote. Hadden Clark was a walking, ticking time bomb that now had a get out of jail card in his back pocket. The courts and the public defender's offices were doing everything possible to keep him on the streets of Maryland and giving him every opportunity to explode once again. This leads us into Laura Houtling's part of this convoluted story. When I was 5 years old, I got up the courage to ask my mother if she believed in God. Laura Houtling once wrote in a high school essay on life and death. She said no, and some other things that I didn't understand. When I asked what would happen when somebody dies if there is no God, she told us she didn't know. That sounded pretty ridiculous and lonely to me, and I was scared because I didn't want anyone to die anymore, and I wished there was a God for my mommy to believe in. Laura's divorced mother, Penny, was a psychotherapist, and Laura was considered a brilliant soul who was going places in life. Nobody was surprised when she was accepted into Harvard University. Her friends expected great things from the beautiful blonde who friends sometimes called Twiggy because she was 6 foot tall. She was going to be president of this country one day, said her close friend, Susanna Monroney. Penny Howling's home in Bethesda, Maryland was about 10 miles from where Michelle Dorr went missing in 1986. Penny liked to help the unfortunate and thought she was doing a good deed when she hired what she thought was a homeless man from a local church organization in early 1992. She needed a gardener, and Hadden proved to be a good worker who soon cleaved to her as if she were his mother. Hadden tended to her zinnias and pruned her perennials so well that she began to give him the run of the kitchen. He was allowed to make himself coffee and use the bathroom while working with no permission necessary. Penny was trusting and perhaps not very observant. When a graduated strand of pearls disappeared, she didn't confront her employee. She also failed to notice that her underwear and other clothing were being stolen, one piece at a time. Penny had once complained to Hadden about some missing gardening tools, and her employee had blown up and yelled at her. Maybe she was being too hard on him, she thought at the time. Laura returned home after her graduation in the summer of 1992. For Hadden, who had become mentally and emotionally affixed to Penny, it seemed that Penny now had another child. She also appeared to like this child more, upsetting him deeply. In mid-October, Penny told Hadden she would be going to a conference for a week. She gave him the exact dates, from the 17th to the 25th. The next day, he went to a local hardware store and purchased 2 rolls of duct tape, some braided rope, and nylon cord. In the left-hand corner of the check used for purchases, where the word memo was printed, he wrote, Laura. That Saturday, October 17th, Laura went to a horse meet in nearby Middleburg, Virginia. A gala dinner party followed the event. The next day, she slept in and then watched a Sunday NFL football game with her older brother, Warren, and his housemate. She had taken a temporary job in Washington until she got a job as a lawyer or became a teacher. There was a big project at the firm due to start the next morning, so she went to bed early, just after 10 o'clock. Hadden didn't look or feel like himself. For starters, he was wearing a woman's wig and was wearing Penny Howling's underwear. He carried a black purse, and over Penny's lingerie, he wore a woman's blouse and slacks. He also wore a woman's trench coat, and underneath the coat, he concealed a .22 caliber rifle. He turned the key in the lock, tiptoed silently to Laura's bedroom, and once inside, used the gun to nudge her awake. His first words to her left the young woman speechless. Why are you in my bed? He asked. Laura didn't know how to respond. What are you doing in my bed? His questions made no sense. Why are you wearing my clothes? Hadden asked. Tears fell from Laura's eyes and onto her cheeks. Tell me I'm Laura, he instructed. You're Laura. Please don't hurt me, she replied. Hadden asked Laura to swear on the Bible that he was Laura. She did. Then, holding the gun on her, he forced Laura to get up, undress, and take a bath. After the cleansing ritual, he led her back into the bedroom and made her lie down on her stomach. He planned to abduct her, take her to his campsite in the woods, and introduce her to Hadden. He bound her wrists with duct tape, then her ankles. He turned her over and began covering her mouth with the tape, but got so excited he couldn't stop and soon covered her nose and eyes. She couldn't breathe. Laura struggled until the lack of air suffocated her and she lay motionless. As Laura remained still, Hadden began removing the tape from her face with a pair of scissors. Excited, his hand slipped and the sharp shears pierced her neck and caused blood to flow onto the sheets and pillowcases. He became fascinated with the earrings she was wearing and decided to take them as a souvenir. When he had a hard time removing the second one, he snipped it off with the scissors, essentially amputating the lower part of her ear. Hadden sat by her bed and watched her lifeless body for nearly an hour. At times he touched her, but would later claim that he neither R-worded nor practiced cannibalism on any part of her remains. At 3 a.m, he wrapped her body in a queen-size sheet, slung her over his shoulder, and stashed her remains on a narrow bed underneath the cab in the back of his truck. He went back inside and gathered up the bloody evidence, such as the sheet, mattress pad, and pillowcase. Then he carried them out, along with some trophies. Laura's high school ring, a crystal unicorn, and other personal effects went into his pockets. Then he lay down on her bed and slept. Hadden, dressed as a woman, left the house around 8 that morning. He was wearing a woman's wig and carrying a purse. A housekeeper standing with a child waiting for a school bus would later tell police she thought the person was Laura, headed out to her job. Hadden got in his truck and drove 2 blocks to the parking lot of a nearby church. He backed into a corner of the lot and went back to sleep. Laura's dead body was beside him. While Hadden slept, Laura's employer began calling the house, each time getting an answering machine. It wasn't like Laura to miss work with no explanation. Concerned, she sent someone out to the house to look around. The young woman, a personal friend, got no answer when she rang the doorbell. Alarmed, she telephoned Laura's brother and began calling her friends. There was no reason to call the police yet. After searching the house, Warren Houdeling decided to walk the route Laura took to the bus stop she often used to get to work. As he walked down the street, he saw Hadden Clark driving towards them in his pickup truck. Hadden was planning another visit to the house for more thievery. Innocently, Warren tried to wave him down to see if the family gardener knew anything about his sister's whereabouts. Indeed, Hadden did pull over, but when Warren walked towards him, he had second thoughts and sped away as if the devil himself was chasing after him. Warren thought the behavior was a bit weird, but he knew Hadden was a little strange as it is and didn't think much about it. Later that night, he and his mother called the police. The cops told them not to worry. Laura would likely turn up soon. Hadden was frightened after his encounter with Warren, so he decided to bury his prize that night. He drove to a spot on Interstate 270, just across the highway from his latest campsite. Laura was heavy, and he stumbled with the dead weight until he dropped her, just 20 feet from the road. He dug feverishly until there was a shallow grave. He rolled her into it and covered the body with dirt and leaves. In the months to come, animals would discover the body and would dig and paw at it, trying to get the remains. By spring, Laura's wrists and lower extremities would rise above ground with heavy rains, forcing the remains upward. Still nervous after burying Laura, Hadden drove north towards New England. He stopped in Rhode Island and stuffed the bloody sheets, mattress pad, and the items he had stolen from Laura in a self-storage locker that he rented by the year. He kept the pillowcase, though. That way, he could relive the night by burying his face into it. If he wanted a bigger thrill, he could take the bloody sheets out of storage and play with them. After stashing the evidence, he drove back to Washington, feeling pretty proud of himself. By now, the Montgomery County, Maryland police wanted to speak with Hadden. Warren and Penny had both mentioned his name, and when his description was phoned into headquarters, alarm bells went off. They realized he was suspected of the disappearance of Michelle Dorr years prior. A still trusting Penny Houdeling shunned the accusation, saying, quote, "Hadden wouldn't hurt anyone, he's just a gardener," end quote. The cops had other ideas. Mike Garvey's boss, Robert Phillips, was called, and he remembered Garvey's account of Hadden and his alibi. When he was asked whether to bring him in, Phillips nearly exploded, saying, "Hadden Clark, absolutely, let's go, let's get him," he shouted into the phone. The cops called Hadden's number, left a voicemail, and Hadden called back almost immediately. He was calm and collected, telling them no, he wouldn't come by the station right now. He was going to bed in his truck, and they would have to wait until the next day. After the call, Hadden drove back to the same church parking lot near Penny and Laura's house. He went into his truck, found the bloody pillowcase, and ran into some woods that bordered the church. He threw the pillowcase near the base of a tree and went back to his truck, falling into a troubled sleep. When Hadden arrived the next day, he was escorted by Sue Snyder, head of a local homeless group. The cops were gentle, partly because they had nothing to arrest him for, and partly because he was chaperoned. Hadden, of course, had an alibi for everything except the time Laura was killed. He was sleeping, he said, in his truck. When he left the station, he began crying, and Sue Snyder asked him why. "I feel so bad for Penny and Warren," he said. When Laura failed to turn up, the local cops decided to do a complete search of the area. A dog from the canine unit led them into the woods near Penny's house that bordered the church. There, the dog turned up one of Penny's bras, a woman's blouse, a high-heeled shoe, and Laura's bloody pillowcase. Taken to a lab, it was determined that the blood type was the same as Laura's. Then the police got lucky. There was a single fingerprint in the cinched dried blood. So the cops hauled Hadden in again. "I'm just a homeless man," he blubbered when apprehended. "I don't have any friends. I'll be jobless after this." During the interrogation, the cops bluffed, saying, We found the pillowcase in the woods, and it had a fingerprint on it. The print was yours, he was told. While they had found a fingerprint, it had not yet been identified. They were hoping for a confession or a reaction at the very least. Hadden didn't completely crack, but he began whimpering, and tears fell as he pulled the wool toboggan he was wearing down over his eyes. "What did you do with Laura Howdeling?" A detective growled. "I don't remember," he answered. Despite the statement, the cops again let him go. They still had nothing to hold him on. Over the next few days, using search warrants, the police examined Hadden's bank account and found a copy of the incriminating check their suspect had written to the hardware store. They also located his campsite, searched it, but didn't find Laura. Then the lab confirmed it was Hadden's fingerprint on the bloody pillowcase. The cops found Hadden late that night, sleeping in the back of his truck with his arms wrapped around a one-eyed teddy bear. Hadden was apprehended and would never see freedom again. Faced with overwhelming evidence, even though there was no body, Hadden Clark pled guilty to second-degree murder and received a 30-year sentence for Laura's death in 1993. Within days after his sentencing, he led the police, his lawyers, and the prosecutors to Laura's body, but his story wasn't over yet. Sometime after his conviction for the murder of Laura Howdeling, Clark was transferred from Western Correctional Institution in Cumberland, Maryland, to the Eastern Correctional Institution in Westover, Maryland. After arriving at the Eastern Correctional Institution, Clark was placed in a cell he shared with a man named Jack Truitt. Astonishingly, Hadden was fully convinced that Truitt was none other than Jesus Christ himself. He believed Jesus was sent to be his cellmate so he could confess and repent for his sins and be forgiven by God. He began telling Truitt about the horrible things he had done to land himself a life sentence in prison. However, Truitt didn't want to hear any of it and told Hadden that if he had something to tell him, he should write it down or draw it out on paper. That's when Hadden started writing nonstop. On one particular occasion, he told Truitt he had something to tell him that no one else knew and that he hadn't told anyone else before. He would go on to tell Truitt that he had murdered Michelle. Truitt thought, "Who the hell is Michelle?" as Hadden went into detail. He went on to tell Truitt that she was a 6-year-old girl he had murdered years ago. He said when he was outside his brother's house that fateful day, he was about to go back inside to grab more of his belongings when Michelle walked up to him. "Where's Eliza?" Michelle asked Hadden. "She's in the house, upstairs in her room, playing with dolls. You can go inside if you like," Hadden replied. He watched Michelle wander into the house and heard her steps as she walked up the stairs of his brother's empty home. When she was out of sight, he walked around to the back of his truck and pulled a toolbox towards himself. As a chef, inside the metal box were the tools of his trade, every kind of knife a commercial restaurant would ever need. There were deboning knives, carving knives, and fish filleting knives with serrated blades, meat cleavers, and more. Each had been honed to its maximum degree of sharpness. Hadden selected a 12-inch long chef's knife and casually strolled into the house and crept up the stairs, tiptoeing with a knife in hand. He followed her into Eliza's room, picked the little girl up, and threw her to the floor. He was on her so fast she didn't get a chance to scream. The first slash was a backhand from left to right across her chest. The second went back the other way, almost like Zorro making the Z sign. She fell back in shock, and he straddled her, putting his free hand over her mouth. She surprised him by biting his hand, fighting back as hard as she possibly could. That made him very angry, so he plunged the 12-inch knife straight through her throat. Blood was all over the wooden floor of the little bedroom. The room in the old house sloped, and the blood settled at the lowest level. He told Truitt he didn't know what to do first. Should he mop up the blood and cover up what he had done, or try to essay the girl? He attempted the latter, but couldn't make it work. He said he raced downstairs to the kitchen and got some plastic trash bags. He ran out to his truck and got some rags and an old Navy duffel bag, went back upstairs and stuffed Michelle into a plastic bag, then put the plastic bag inside the duffel bag. He got on his hands and knees, mopping up the blood as if he was swabbing the deck on one of the aircraft carriers he had served on. Everything that had blood on it was stuffed into the other plastic trash bags, which he also put in the duffel bag. He said his cleanup looked pretty good to his eyes. Nothing seemed out of place. Nobody would know what had just happened. Satisfied, he threw the duffel bag into the bed of his truck and sped off to work. He had to be at the Chevy Chase Country Club in 20 minutes. He knew he couldn't be late, because that would be noticed. His alibi had inadvertently been handed to him by Carl, Michelle's father, when Carl, in an attempt to avoid seeming like a neglectful parent, originally told the police that the last time he saw Michelle was 2:10 p.m., but there was no way that was possible. After his shift, he drove to a wooded ravine near Route 29 in Silver Spring, Maryland, and buried Michelle. He buried her under an old box spring, so if animals tried to dig up her remains to eat them, they wouldn't be able to get through the metal in the box spring, and it worked. He reiterated that no one knew any of that, and he had never told anyone about Michelle before telling Truett. Truett was rightfully disgusted. This prompted him to call his wife, explain what he'd been told by Hadden, and ask her to contact whoever she had to and get this information into the hands of the right person. She did as Truett asked, and he was then contacted by Lou Luciano, a former special agent with the FBI who was based out of the Baltimore field office. Truett told Luciano what Hadden told him, and the detective asked Truett what he thought about it all. Truett told him he was almost positive Hadden wasn't lying. Luciano then asked Truett if he could get Hadden to show them where he buried Michelle's body. I think I can, Truett replied. Truett told Hadden that if he wanted forgiveness, he had to give him something and show the police where he buried her. Hadden agreed. However, on the day of, Hadden refused to take detectives to the park where he buried Michelle. The detectives then asked Truett if he had any ideas. Truett asked the detectives if he could get a few minutes alone with Hadden in a nearby secured room, and the detectives allowed it. Once Truett was alone in the room with Hadden, he grabbed him by the collar, slammed him against the wall, and told him, quote, "You're going to show these detectives where that little girl's body is," end quote. In fear, Hadden replied, "You're Jesus. You're supposed to be peaceful. You're not supposed to hurt people." Truett then said, "I am being peaceful. I'm beating the devil out of you," and proceeded to beat the hell out of Hadden while the detectives waited on the other side of the door. When they emerged from that room, Hadden was ready to show the police where Michelle's body was. However, he wasn't going anywhere without Jesus. So the detectives opted to take Truett with them, and on January 7, 2000, Hadden Clark led police to a wooded ravine near Route 29 in Silver Spring, Maryland. There, the police found Michelle's gravesite 14 years after she went missing.
Do you want to cry? Want to get the tears out?
Grab what?
What you did to Laura. Don't pick at that. Don't eat scabs. It'll make you sick. Then how you ate Laura? Cut her up in little pieces until she bled. You tasted the blood, and that tasted good, and you couldn't stop, and you had some more blood. You had some more body parts. Is that what you did to her? That means yes. You didn't say no.
You got a major problem. You're going around here eating all kinds of meat. You know, Jeffrey Dahmer's getting, what did Jeffrey get? Life?
No, did you get life? The problem with Jeffrey Dahmer, he got caught with all these dead people in his apartment, and he had cut their hearts and livers out and put them in the freezer and frozen.
Jeffrey Dahmer's kind of like you. He killed something. I don't know whether you ate him, but you might have eaten some. Did you try to eat much?
Eat flesh. Eat people.
Hadden, what kind of sex are you into? Do you like, when you go out, do you go out with women or do you like to go out with men? Who do you prefer? I mean, if we went out on a date, would you be wearing women's clothes or would you be wearing women's underwear? Do you like stuff like this? Hadden. You don't like me sitting near you?
Take off your coat. Now get over there and sit down. Sit down in that goddamn chair and you stay seated. You act like a goddamn man, stop acting like a kid.
First of all, you're being charged with murder.
You have to pat me like that? Hit me? I'm not hitting you, I'm sorry. I just like to be friendly. Okay? Why don't you just sit over there?
No, God, no.
Come on.
So let's go. You want to smell
Can I sit over there?
No, we're going to sit
Can
together.
I sit over there? You and I are going to be friends.
That's good. Hey, buddy. Hey, this is a nice dog. Yeah, I like that dog. What kind of undies you got?
I ain't got no girlies on these today, buddy. Ain't no doubt. Oh, ooh, Daddy. Jackie Lace. Nobody holds this against you. Everybody realizes that you got a psychological problem. You're sick. Yeah, you were sick. If I can show that you murdered this girl, you're going to the electric chair. If I can show you're sane. Okay? You understand that 2 murders makes you a serial murder, means you go to the electric chair. If you're sane. If you're insane, you go off to some hospitals.
Sometimes I think you hear voices inside your head. You heard a lot of voices? You want me to tell you something else here? Not a little secret we know that you know. There was a lady on a street corner across from Henny's house who saw you dressed up like a woman.
The trench coat.
Who was that who walked out of the house?
Is there anything?
Just think of her name.
To be nice.
Did that person carry Laura somewhere? That's not Hayden. That's somebody else in Hayden. Did it go in the house at night? Did it go in the door and sneak up to the bedroom with a knife?
Yeah.
Did it sneak up there with a knife? And Laura was in there sleeping. She was beautiful. And that person got on top of Laura. And got on top of Laura and started got a pillow and put it on Laura. Got a knife out, started cutting. It's an awful thing. It's an awful thing to think of, but we have to get it out of you. It's the only way. I think it's almost out. Bring it out. What did that person do with Laura?
What do you think, Hayden? How you feel? Let's get back to the nitty-gritty.
Come on.
Hayden,
Come on, let's get it out, buddy.
I don't
Let's get it out. Come on, Pete. Let's get it out. Come on, there's somebody in there that wants to come out.
I'm not
Needs
saying
to
you.
come out.
I will kill you. You understand? Don't ever do that again.
Come on, Pete. Bring it out. Here, let's drink your coke.
Drink your coat and let's go.
You ain't Jeffrey Dahmer, was it?
Oh, boy. What's your favorite movie? Silence of the Lambs?
Hadden Clark was again found guilty of second-degree murder in October 1999 for Michelle Dorr's murder. He received a 30-year sentence on top of his previous murder conviction. This story really stuck with me when I originally heard about it. However, deep diving into it was much more intense than I could have ever imagined. Hopefully you found this video informative at the very least. There is no combination of words in the English language vile enough to accurately describe how disgustingly terrible Hadden Clark truly is. Jack Truitt, on the other hand, may not be Jesus, but is surely nothing less than a hero. Rest in peace to Michelle Dorr and Laura Howdeling. Thank you all for listening, and as usual, if you're a fan of urban legends, folklore, unsolved mysteries, cold cases, and all things mysterious, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel.